God's crooked lines. Carlos, a dedicated 38-year-old civil construction engineer, respected for his competence and commitment to work. I never imagined what I would go through. Resident of a large city near the Uruguay coast, a city that also provided his services, he thought his life was a little boring, as he had followed a specific routine for more than a decade. And on the way to work, Carlos talked to God and said he would like to experience new things. On an August morning, Carlos was preparing for another day at the construction site where he was supervising the construction of a large building in the city center. That day, however, would be marked by a tragic and transformative event. During an inspection on the 15th floor, a crane, by accident, bumps into a cable supporting and protecting a platform, the very one that Carlos and two other colleagues were analyzing. Upon impact, the platform tilts to the point where it becomes impossible to balance on it. So Carlos and one of his colleagues fall to the bottom floor of the building. As it was construction in progress, several tools were exposed, and as luck would have it, an electric chisel ended up piercing Carlos' back, causing him to lose a lot of blood in addition to the brutal fall he suffered. Around 15 minutes later, a helicopter arrived at the scene to rescue Carlos, his colleague who had also been injured. He was conscious and relatively well, despite some bruises. Carlos was rushed to the emergency room, where doctors found multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and severe trauma to 3 ribs. The situation was critical, and the prognosis was discouraging. Helena, Carlos's wife, who found out about what happened when he was already in the hospital, arrives and is barred for reasons of safety and sensitivity from the emergency ward. Desperate and crying, she seeks comfort in the lap of a nurse who tried to calm her down. Praying incessantly and almost in a state of shock, Helena had to be treated, and he falls asleep saying, "Jesus, if you love me, then help my companion, I beg you." The same night, in the hospital, Helena wakes up, still under the influence of sedatives, and asks a nurse who was accompanying her about Carlos. The nurse then calls 2 doctors who approach and, with great regret, give her the worst news she has ever could receive. Carlos had passed away moments before, and there was nothing that could be done. Astonished, Helena faints, and later recounts the most impressive experience of her life. When she faints, she finds herself outside her own body and starts to see everyone there supporting her, but no one sees her. Helena, worried about her husband, inexplicably appears in front of his body in the emergency room and sees him in a deplorable and lifeless situation. Amazed, she is surprised by Carlos standing next to her. His spirit approaches and says, "My love, go back to your body. I will find you in a little while. Tell the red-haired doctor that Alice will also come back." Helena listens to those words in confusion and suddenly comes back from fainting, certain that it had been a unique and transcendent experience, where she had just seen her husband's spirit asking her to return and that they would meet soon. Excitedly, she loudly declares to the nurse and doctors present, "Run to the emergency room. He's going to wake up." The doctors, thinking it was an outbreak due to trauma, asked the nurse to get new sedatives, and then Helena exclaimed, "Wait, there's no need. I'm not crazy, doctor. My husband told you that Alice is coming back too." At this moment, the doctor, who was sure of his verdict, is startled by the statement, opens his eyes wide, turns his back and goes to the other floor where he had previously lost Carlos to death. Upon entering the room accompanied by 2 other colleagues who followed him, he got the biggest surprise of his life. Carlos had his eyes partially open and looked try to say something. The most impressive thing is that he had come back to life contrary to all scientific theory. 2 days later, still hospitalized, but conscious, Carlos receives a visit from his wife in the room, who, very emotional, says, "You spoke to me, my love. Jesus saved you." Carlos, still weak, just smiles happily. As she was unable to stay in the room for a long time due to the demands of the emergency department, Helena was asked to leave the room, but with the promise that in a few days her husband would go home. Upon leaving, Helena bumped into the doctor who helped with her husband's surgeries, and without wasting time, she begins to thank her emotionally and vehemently. The surgeon, who was known to be a serious man, says with eyes full of tears as he holds her by the shoulders, "No, my dear, I have to thank you. Because of you, today I know that God exists." Confused, Helena looks fixedly at the doctor, who continues to say, "Almost no one knows, but you, as well as some colleagues, deserve to know. 2 days ago, my daughter had a cardiac arrest and was on the 4th floor of this hospital, and while I was in surgery for her husband, a team of colleagues were trying to save her life. As soon as I left, I received the news that she was not resisted, and suddenly, you wake up from that faint and say that my daughter would also come back. Do you remember that? And during your husband's surgery, in my thoughts I only knew how to call on God. I never believed in him, but I kept repeating and repeating that. If he existed, he would save my daughter, and at this moment, up there, in the bedroom floor, Alice is being discharged. I don't know if they informed her, but Carlos had an obstruction in his heart that would certainly cause a myocardial infarction. As we had to operate it, we discovered this and have now resolved it as well. Perhaps, if he hadn't had an accident, he would never have known about this obstruction, and he could have died suddenly. I'm sorry for wasting so many years of my life ignoring the existence of God. This week, I saw 3 great miracles happen: your husband, my daughter, and the new life I will have from now on.